disrupted.
America that I fuck.
Weird thing to happen. Hello, one and all. Welcome to this edition of Kitz Corner. Been a fantastic day so far. So, our Honorable Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, did something daring recently. Instead of belittling podcasts, he went and got interviewed on a podcast, believe it or not. Apparently, all those independent sources aren't actually that bad. Well, depending on what this podcast really is. I'm not too sure what this show is, but he went on this show called Real Talk with, and I'm blanking on the name already. Real Talk with Ryan Jespersen, not Jefferson. I had to be clear it wasn't Jefferson. I guess he wasn't moving on up to the east side. He didn't get that piece of the pie. Some of you might get that joke, some of you might not. That's okay. I get it. It's a very oldie tune. But anyway, Justin Trudeau got interviewed on this podcast, having a real talk with Ryan Jespersen. And the conversation started off by mentioning about Bell Media and the layoffs and CBC and their layoffs and the kind of collapse of the media outlets in Canada, how mainstream media is basically colliding against itself and collapsing within by resurging just more propaganda and then taking that money that Justin Trudeau and the government invested into mainstream media, trying to keep it afloat, and running it off to the CEOs. So really, it was just more of a lucrative bribe. It wasn't actually to save the ideals of broadcasting. It was more just a bribe to keep mainstream media keep pushing the same narrative, because in the end, all it is about narrative control. And Justin Trudeau is going to take that conversation and tell you exactly why we need narrative control against independent broadcasters and why it's so important that we keep aiding mainstream media that's dying on behalf of itself, pushing these propagandization of the government. Take a look at this.
I would tell him he needs to talk about all issues in the same tone as he spoke about those job cuts. Speak more from the heart, show more passion. I think you are today. Let me ask you this.
I just got to say, it's amazing that he's got, the short sleeve shirt and he's rolling up the arms there. He's showing, the bicep like, he's trying to make himself look like the tough guy. The tough guy with the nice watch. Like, yeah, I'm an everyman. Remember when he was boarding a train with jeans? Like trying to pose as like the everyman. Oh, I'm just like you. I just happen to be this rich kid and travel around on a private jet. And I took 8 vacations this year. But I'm just like a hard-working Canadian. Just barely working myself.
In closing, you showed uncharacteristic candor. You said that you were pissed off about what was happening. David Eby and BC have famously called it the encrapification of news. What is the proper role for the feds? There's no question. I'm not up for debate on the value of journalism, but to what extent does government get involved here, and what are you prepared to do?
See,
So this is what makes me question this podcast and why Justin Trudeau, out of all places, decide to go here to be interviewed. Because the question he's asking is, how much does the government have to play a role in journalism? And the real situation is that journalism is supposed to be against the government. They're supposed to be the ones counteracting and holding the government accountable for their actions. They're not supposed to be a friendly buddy system. They're not supposed to be aided by the government. They're supposed to be investigating the government. So the fact that the government is stepping in and putting money towards Bell Media and Rogers and the CBC to keep them afloat while the CEOs are taking that cash and running away with it, it's not saving broadcasting. It's not saving the industry, unfortunately. It's sad, but it's not saving the industry. It's just a lucrative bribe. It's just a lucrative bribe so the network heads, the people in charge of these broadcast networks, the big giant CTV, Global, BBC, like all the outlets in Canada here, keep pushing the same narrative. It's all about narrative control. So the podcaster, Ryan Jespersen, is asking how much should the government intervene in broadcasting? Like that's your question. That's your question. You don't understand the concept of journalism, how it needs to be holding the powerful powerful accountable, not kissing up to the powerful. They're not supposed to be like brother sister. It's not a sibling situation. But here's what Trudeau says.
That's the big trick and the really, really tricky question right now, because there is out there a deliberate undermining of mainstream media. There are the conspiracy theorists, there are the social media drivers who are trying to do everything they can to keep people in their little filter bubbles, to prevent people from actually agreeing on a common set of facts.
Yes, there are the dangerous conspiracy theorists and social media drivers that are out there communicating with the rest of the world that are undermining mainstream media. And it's dangerous because we no longer have a common ground narrative. We no longer have common facts that we can all align to. It's hilarious that someone like me is somehow such a threat to mainstream media. Like me doing a shoestring podcast in their basement, just observing videos and articles and just talking about it, is somehow throttling the entire empire of mainstream media. Like I feel like that's a compliment on my behalf. I feel like I should go back to my high school now and see, like, hey, remember when you called me a loser and said I was never going to amount to anything? Well, I'm taking down mainstream media, folks, so, I apparently am one of the people that is so dangerous to the ideals of journalism by having a conversation with you. Oh, my God. That's such a funny take. That is such a funny, out of touch, insane take. And of course, coming from the Prime Minister, that has already put so many legislative agendas against podcasters and trying to silence them out and increase more censorship to, again, get us into that common ground, which means narrative control, which means everybody simultaneously gets into that one line. You can't have different opinions. You can't be diverse on what you're saying. You just all have to fit into that one bubble. We're apparently such a big threat in that way. I got to hear this again because that's funny.
On the value of journalism, but to what extent does government get involved here, and what are you prepared to do?
See, that's the big trick and the really, really tricky question right now, because there is
that's the big trick, the tricky question. How much do I want to intervene to the point where we're basically North Korea? And I once even had an argument about this with somebody, because, at the time of the pandemic, at the time when people were starting to question what the official narrative was, starting to question the censorship of doctors, censorship of nurses and medical advisors that were following the virus, that were doing medical research and testing about vaccines and stuff like that. I can tell you they're very safe and effective, but other people have been saying and questioning the official narrative, and had an argument with somebody about this, about how, oh, well, it's because there's so many choices out there. There's so many choices of news, so many choices of information, so many different channels to watch and news to consume and all these different areas. Wouldn't it just be easier if we just went down to one? Like, someone actually told me that. And And I'm thinking to myself, like North Korea, like state media in North Korea, like a dictatorship where it's just 24 hours a day of just regurgitated government statements that are peddled at every moment in turn, where they can't turn off the TV, they can't change the channel, they can't listen to music. It's just regurgitated government propaganda spewed right in your face constantly. That's really going to be better. That's really going to be beneficial to the public. Because even with the different channels that we have now, we're kind of in that zone. We're kind of in that point already. Like, it may be a different person that you're getting your news from, but at the same time, it's the same advertisers, the same government is supplying, telling them exactly what to say, telling them how to produce their content, and just pushing the exact same narrative. It may be just a different tone than some other networks, but it's the exact same thing. But it's just, that's the most funniest thing. That's the funniest thing. Here in diverse Canada, we're supposed to be happy with multiculturalism and value our differences, our independent lifestyle, and value the freedom of expressing our own opinions. But apparently, no, we got to find common ground to squish everyone together and not have these different opinions, because different opinions make people think.
They're a deliberate undermining of mainstream media. There are the conspiracy theorists, there are the social media drivers who are trying to do everything they can to keep people in their little filter bubbles, to prevent people from actually agreeing on a common set of facts, the way, the CBC and CTV, when they were our only sources of news, used to project across the country at least a common understanding of things. Any government that chooses to step up and say, well, this is the mainstream view, will, if we're not careful, actually compromise those organizations as being mouthpieces for a mainstream view that people on the fringes are exactly. So,
isn't that already what you're doing, though? Isn't that what you're already doing? I mean, we saw that in effect with the pandemic. We saw that in effect when you basically told people and told the broadcasters, this is the information that we're given by Health Canada and the WHO. This is the official agenda. And anyone that says differently is obviously anti-science or anti-health, and I guess doesn't care about Canadian lives and citizens. They said that to doctors. They said that to nurses. They said that to people who were studying the vaccine. They told people at McMaster University that were trying to develop their own vaccine, hey, no, you're not allowed to do that, because we're going to roll out some Pfizer and Moderna and AstraZeneca, these big conglomerates, and shove that down people's throats. You're not allowed to have a different approach to medicine. That's already taken effect. And he's saying that governments should be careful. I'm not saying that this is the official narrative, because, oh my God, then people are going to mistrust the news and think that they're just peddling the government's agenda. It's already happened. They're already losing the factor because of stuff like that, because of the pandemic, because of Ukraine and Russia, because of Israel-Palestine. All the narrative control that's already being pushed down our throats, the propagandization, and not having someone that's critical of the establishment, critical of the government, yes, people are going to lose trust in it. They already know that they're peddling and basically stenographers for Justin Trudeau. Not to mention all the crimes and scandals that he's committed that no real journalist out there, besides maybe Rebel News and a few other independent sources, are willing to cover.
So how do we actually shift that? I think one of the ways you do it is create opportunities for strong, clear voices like yours, like this show, to be a source of news where people are.
So that to me sounds like his C11 approach. That was that bill that came out that said, like, hey, we're going to push more Canadian voices. They tried to frame the bill as some sort of, push and some motive to help promote Canadian content. But when you read into the bill and you read between the lines and you figure out exactly what this bill is saying to you, it's the government deciding exactly what's acceptable Canadian content that goes out to Canadians. Because I'm a Canadian, I'm broadcasting here in Canada, I'm showing you Canadian news. I technically would be considered Canadian content, but not acceptable in the eyes of the government, in the eyes of that bill. So that's what he's trying to say here, is that, we got to push more you guys that are forcing narrative control, that's not allowing difference of opinion, that's not being accountable to the government. We're just going to push you guys, and then everybody else is just a bunch of conspiracy fringe minorities that, have unacceptable views in the country.
Actually drawing on real conversations and evidence-based presentation and thoughtful exposition and investigation where necessary. Like there are massive changes that need to happen.
And again, Rebel News doesn't do that. I mean, I have different outcomes than them. I don't totally agree with everything that they say. But why is Rebel News reporters getting arrested for holding accountable people like Chrystia Freeland and having evidence to back the claims that they're saying? Meanwhile, this podcaster is having, a tea party with Justin Trudeau saying, we got to push more voices like you who are saying that the government needs to intervene more in media.
Happen in our media landscape, and government can try and create conditions and incentives for it to happen, but ultimately it does come down to Canadians saying, you know what, I don't want to accept the encrafication of news. And quite frankly, the number of followers you have, the number of great podcasts people are out there getting their news from, the way people are consuming their stories from around the world in more thoughtful ways, that is a good thing. But where it's lacking is that local content, is the stories about the closure of this street that's going to cause trouble in this neighborhood. As soon as you get to a certain size, as soon as you have audience across the country, you can't spend a lot of time on what's happening down at the end of Main Street in your community.
Yeah, it's our fault that we're not covering enough local stories. I guess that's the problematic situation. If we just covered more about what happened down the road at my neighborhood, then this wouldn't be a problem. Well, I don't know. Maybe we could cover a local story like the fact that the homeless rate is escalating because of mass inflation, because of the economic crisis that we're dealing with. How about the fact that we're sending money off to Ukraine while we're telling veterans, Canadian veterans, to sign up for suicide because we can't afford to treat them? How about that for a local story? How about that for local coverage? Talk to those people, the tent cities that are around us right now. Talk to those people and find out how appreciative they feel about Justin Trudeau and his reigning terror. The opportunity that he's providing to people. You notice how he said that? The opportunity? Like, he won't say, I find it funny. I find it funny that, American politics, I give them this. American politicians are straightforward when it comes to corruption. Like, they are straightforward, just announcing. I think of American politicians like angry mobsters back in the day. Like, you know what? We're just going to send this money anyway. Screw you. Homeless people just got to suffer. Whatever. But here in Canada, and you see this a lot with legislation. You see this a lot with, how they present a bill. Even when you read a lot of our bills that are passed in Parliament, it's like they're trying to feed around the bush so much. They just don't want to be obvious about it, so they're trying to feed around the bush by saying, no, we're creating opportunities. We just want, we want good governance when it comes to the media. We want to help you guys. We want to promote Canadian content like you. But we have to find out what's acceptable Canadian content, and that's where we have to go through peer reviews, and people like me are a definition of a conspiracy theorist because, God forbid, I talk to people, I do some research, I look up things, I provide that context to you, and then let you determine for yourself the information that I'm presenting to you. God forbid we have critical analysis of stuff that's going on in the world. And I feel like Justin Trudeau and the mainstream media, again, they are doing this to themselves. This whole kind of undermining the mainstream narrative, the undermining of these outlets, the fact that CBC is losing trust and people are saying, you know, F you to the broadcaster. They are doing this to themselves. They're doing this to themselves because you have former journalists like this one here. This is from the Canadian Independent. A 34-year veteran, CBC reporter Marianne Clowick testified that when COVID hit the broadcaster betrayed the public, broke their trust, pushed propaganda, and stopped telling the truth. During the National Citizens Inquiry in Ottawa, veteran CBC reporter Marianne Clowick, with 34 years of experience, testified that when COVID hit the broadcaster, it betrayed the public, broke their trust, pushed propaganda, and said that as a public broadcaster, you expect us to tell the truth, and we stopped doing that. So this is a 34-year journalist who's worked at this network throughout all these different decades. And it's amazing how in the flip of a switch, when COVID immediately hit, that CBC turned the other cheek. CBC that once upon a time was actually a reliable source. CBC once upon a time was actually an informative broadcaster. But now it's become more and more obvious that they're pushing more propagandization, infotainment. They're not informing people about the real situations at foot because they're so devoted into ratings. They're devoted into advertisers. They want to get more of that lucrative government funding. So here's what this former journalist has to say about this.
I know that as a public broadcaster, you expect us to be telling you the truth, and we'd stop doing that. And there was another number of stories that I had put forward that were blocked. But it seemed to me, as a journalist who'd been there 34 years, it's like the rules had changed overnight. And it changed so quickly that it left me just dizzy in disbelief. I was blocked and prevented from doing stories that I'd pitched, that I'd put forward. They never saw the light of day. They never made it to air or print. And some of those stories were protests against vaccine mandates, people's safety concerns about the vaccines, and also the many problems with reporting adverse reactions in Canada. And for me, what was so disorienting about this was that, I had learned from the best of the best at the CBC. This is where I learned to think critically and fearlessly hold power to account, to break stories and uncover information that you, the public, has a right to know. And I also would like to mention that the newsroom I worked in CBC Manitoba, that they were a leader in investigative journalism across the entire network, second only to Toronto. And this was a newsroom that produced award-winning stories that sparked change at the highest level of corporations and government. By the time I left in December of 2021, I no longer recognized the CBC. And I really didn't think my career would end this way, that the skills I learned and honed at the CBC would be used to hold power to account within the corporation.
Can I just...
So amazing how that changed in an instant. I mean, we knew that a while now that things were going downhill. We knew that things were going downhill, but it really was symbolic the moment COVID hit and mainstream media, the big outlets started reporting on it, and the direction of how they're reporting it, and the direction of where they were choosing their stories from, and who was involved in the process. This is a 34-year veteran who left the network because critical thinking died off at the CBC. Because the idea of investigating and holding accountable, which is one of the formations of journalism, that's the biggest thing you could be doing as a journalist, is holding people accountable and finding stories and investigating people and reaching out and lifting up the voices of the disenfranchised, the people that were suffering through adverse side effects. They didn't even report any of those stories. None of those stories got reported. Why? Because I'm sure Pfizer's executives came in and peddled money towards the CBC to block stories from her, to block stories from other journalists. So the broadcasters are doing this to themselves. They're doing this to themselves, and it gets to a point where the public starts to realize this. So here's an article. This is from The Conversation, saying Canadians' trust in the news media hits a new low. The digital news media report studies the consumption habits online news consumers and sheds a light on the issues facing news media across the globe. So a lot more people are reaching out to social media, podcasters, YouTubers, people on Rumble, people writing Substack articles, because regular people that are on social media tend to actually reach out to other people and they interact with the general public. So they have more of an in-touch story. They have an in-touch analysis of what's going on in the world. But you get big broadcasters that sit in board meetings that don't care. They just want the advertisers. They want eyes glued to the screens. They don't care about informing people, because if we actually inform people, then we would understand how corrupted our government is, how corrupted our system really is. They don't want that, because they flourish in our corrupted government. They're getting, cutbacks. They're getting big incentive bonuses to get paid off to push propaganda. Just like this. And I'm sure people are aware of this story. But this is National Post saying this. The head of CBC, Catherine Tate, and yes, that is her name, tells MPs it's not her decision if she gets a bonus or not amid planned layoffs. So all that money that was supposed to be helping the opportunity of broadcasting, people like Catherine Tate, who was the head of CBC, ran off with the money. The CEOs of these big conglomerates, the CBC, Rogers Media, Chorus Entertainment, Bell Media, they ran off with the money. Again, none of the broadcast jobs underneath them matter to them. Most of it's gone to AI, or they've done remote stuff. I know people that were PAs for Marilyn Dennis Show and Cityline that lost their jobs during COVID. And they just got fed. They were just dangling a carrot in front of them saying that, at some point, we'll get you back and we'll secure your job. You'll have job security. Please stay with us. We can't unfortunately pay you, so on and so forth, making up excuses. So they got fired. Because they realized, hey, we can do the exact same daytime talk show remotely with less people and not have to worry about jobs. And that's exactly what's happening here. Because they're probably going to use that money to automate their television studios, remove more jobs out of the industry. And the broadcast quality, the industry that used to actually mean something in this world, is going to get even worse. It's going to be even worse for viewers. So, this is the CBC, Bell Media, Rogers Media, and Chorus Entertainment. This is them doing it to themselves. They are the ones committing their own suicide by doing stuff like this, by doing shady, undermining deals, kissing up to the government, and partnering with them to do narrative control. Because they're just funding, they're peddling the exact same garbage that the government would just tell you directly, which is just a form of state media. You just have more options of which voices you're going to hear, the already approved propagandized stunts. Or you can come to people like me and other YouTubers that actually interact with the general public and maybe are interested in helping the general public. Maybe they're actually curious. Maybe I just want to know a little bit more about what's going on in the world. That was kind of the incentive of why I did this show. But now I'm apparently such a big threat to mainstream media. I never thought I'd see the day. I never thought that would be a reality for me. I should have that as a plaque. I should have that, behind me. There should be a plaque right behind my head here. Big threat to mainstream media. Because God forbid I do a web show looking up articles, discussing it with people, and then telling you about it. God forbid we have conversations in Canada.